This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on March the 2nd, 1965. The interview is conducted by Mr. Frank Doyle. The interviewee is Mr. E Guy Owens of Oklahoma City. This interview is being re-recorded on April the 15th, 1985 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Well, that's the whole idea of this activity, Mr. Owen, is to keep these tapes in what Oklahoma Christian College calls the Living Legend Library, and what they will be used for is historians and school students in their workshops and for reference works, and it'll be, as a matter of fact, the only one in the state, and perhaps the only one in the country for a university, or a college rather, to have at their disposal.
Well, I got the idea that they wanted some history of the Christian church, that college out there. My father was a Christian minister and came from Kentucky.
Is that where you came from?
I was born in Kentucky.
Born in Kentucky. Where?
Well, I was in what was called the Pennyroyal District, Western Kentucky.
Western Kentucky.
And my older brother and I were born in Kentucky. My father was a minister. We moved about from there to Illinois, Missouri.
Where in Missouri?
Maryville, Missouri.
Maryville, oh yes.
Nottoway County, it's northwest Missouri, but close to the Iowa line up there. He came down to Oklahoma in 1999, December.
Mm-hmm. When? 1899?
1899, yes.
1899. What was your father doing? Was he still a minister?
He was a minister.
He was a minister.
He came to Oklahoma primarily on account of his health. He had asthma pretty bad.
Mm-hmm.
And this dry climate down here appealed to him, and he came down here and made some investigation, and they had a town site laid out there east of Guthrie named Coyle.
Coyle.
Town of Coyle.
Uh-huh.
And a man named Lee had a hardware business in Maryville, and shipped his goods and came down. He had two sons. And
who's this?
Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee.
Lee Hardware at Coyle,
Mm-hmm.
first store established in the town of Coyle, and we had the first residence in the town of Coyle.
Hmm.
And I came down with Penny Lee, one son of Mr. Lee, in the boxcar with the team of horses and the cow and the household goods.
Yes, sir.
To 5 days and nights on a freight train in December. Landing in Guthrie down there, and a cup of hot coffee tasted pretty good. And you got, I think.
How old were you at that time?
So I was 17.
17.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we landed out there and established the first house in a wheat field and cotton patch out there, Coyle, Oklahoma. I attempted to go back to school. I knew I hadn't had enough schooling when I was a sophomore in high school when I left Maryville.
Mm-hmm.
And I went over down to A&M College at Stillwater next fall, and had to work my own way. After being over there 3 months, I found my folks needed help take care of the family. I had 3 younger children and 5 of us all together, but 7 became the parents. So I had to come home and go to work, do whatever I could find to do, help out. And we helped. I worked with a saw and hammer, what you might call a saw and hammer carpenter for 75 cents a day. The contractor paid the carpenters $1.25 a day. With me being a kid, he paid me 75 cents, and I put on just as many shingles or laths as any of them. And mixed mortar, carried the hod up and down the ladder to the top of these buildings. Worked in the wheat fields and cotton fields, and helped pitch bundles in the threshing machine in harvest time. Worked on the railroad for a week until my mother found out how tough those fellows were. Irish workmen on it. They was building the railroad out that way to Stillwater from Guthrie.
Yes, sir.
But one of the first things that they had established in the town was a saloon.
Mm-hmm.
On Saturday night, you'd find drunken Irishmen on the man out in the cotton rows or on a pile of lumber or behind the building, almost anywhere. Right up a few miles from Guthrie, the colored town of Langston, all colored.
Yes.
That's where we used to go to get our mail.
Uh-huh.
I rode a bicycle up there and back and forth to bring the mail down come down after dark most of the time, in the winter time. And those colored boys hide out behind the barn down there and throw corn cobs and hard coal. But these Irishmen out there get drunk and they decide they're going up and clean up Langston, down at Langston, you know.
Mm-hmm.
One Sunday morning I saw a big burly Irishman with his face all bloody and the hair tousled coming marching down the middle of the street with a big shillelagh, daring anybody to show up. Just anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody showed up. That is part of the early experience.
Those were exciting days, weren't they?
And then I realized I hadn't had enough schooling. Saved up some money, and following year, 1901, I went over to Guthrie and entered the business college. Took a business course, 5 months. Capital City Business College, which is extinct, not in existence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And just as I was finishing that course, Judge Thomas J. Lowe came up one day looking for a boy to be an office boy in the office of the Mutual Life Insurance Company of New York. He'd been made manager of the state for that company that year, the oldest life insurance company in America. And the reason he was life insurance business was that he came up here from Texas, where he had the title of judge on the bench down there, district judge. And came up here and he was secretary of the land office, the territorial days. And then he was ex officio insurance commissioner, all in one office that time. That's in Cleveland's administration. And then when they changed administration in Washington, the Democrats went out and the Republicans came in, and Judge Lowe went up in the life insurance business, and he picked the Mutual Life because it was the oldest, best-known life insurance company in the country. He sold all of his friends and acquaintances down in Oklahoma Mutual Life. Well, I started in the office with him at $25 a month as an office boy. Got a little raise in salary after 60 days. And I stayed there for 14 years in Guthrie.
In Guthrie?
As clerk, assistant cashier, and cashier.
Uh-huh.
And Judge Lowe was stricken with apoplexy. He had a cerebral hemorrhage. And in those days, the company didn't have what they call pension systems like you do nowadays, old age insurance. And there he was stricken and knew he couldn't last too long. So I went out through the field helping the agents and appointing agents and helping keep the business going and to help him hold his job on the cashier's salary.
Yeah.
And the company discovered a situation where it was getting worse all the time with Judge Lowe in that condition. He's free to go around over the state and create more trouble than he did to help. And they decided to move the office down to Oklahoma City. You know, Oklahoma, in territorial days, Guthrie was a state capital, or territorial capital. And people would come here, get off the train at Guthrie first. That is the first objective. Most of them.
That was the end of the line then, wasn't it?
Up and there.
Mm-hmm.
And being politically prominent, capital of the state, the politicians had the power. The people that stopped off at Guthrie was people more or less politically minded. And a bunch of fellows down there in Oklahoma City, C.G. Jones and Mr. Overall, too, the father of Ed Overall, Overall, too, who was so long the mayor of Oklahoma City, and Klassen and Chartel, and a lot of those men, businessmen that conceived the idea of building the city on the foundation of a business rather than political pull or power. And the Oklahoma City, then they brought in the railroads to Oklahoma City rather than through Guthrie, Frisco, Rock Island, or Choctaw as they called then. And well, that was a turning point. When we first came to Oklahoma, Guthrie and Oklahoma City was about the same size, about 10 or 11,000 people. Or maybe between 11 and 12,000. Town of Guthrie with 11 or 12,000 people had 21 saloons. It wasn't an uncommon sight to go downtown on Saturday night and see drunken men running around the alley. Meet them on. Nobody dared go downtown after dark. No woman. But and the streets wasn't paved. I remember when the hill leading up to the depot there, Guthrie was first started to pave it, and they had a gang of colored men out there. They hired one nigger to sing while the rest of them worked, you know. If they'd work better if they had somebody leading the song.
Working rhythm, huh?
Rhythm. There's that our window from our office. Across the street was the city hall. I remember when the Constitutional Convention was held in Guthrie, when we was admitted to statehood in 1907. Judge Lowe was one of the men that went to Washington with what you call to bring statehood back in the satchel from one of the committeemen that's appointed sitting up there. I remember Bill Murray and C.N. Haskell when before they ever thought about becoming governors. Bill Murray sitting there with his feet on the table, eating peanuts with a dirty handkerchief hanging out his hip pocket. His long hair.
What did he do? What was he?
Bill Murray, Alfalfa Bill Murray. Did you ever hear of him? He was a governor, later governor of Oklahoma. Very picturesque and a smart man in a lot of ways.
Was he a lawyer?
Oh, yes. He came from Tishomingo, Oklahoma.
I can recall not being a native, but reading about him, and it was a very colorful.
He later organized immigration to Bolivia, went down there and lived for a while. He was going to educate the people down there, but he came back for a year or two. He was the father of the later Murray that became governor, you know.
Johnston Murray.
Johnston Murray was his son, you know. Then I saw Haskell inaugurated as governor, and I saw Bill Murray inaugurated. I saw France inaugurated, appointed by Theodore Roosevelt, the President of the United States, one of the Rough Riders. Frank France was named governor in territorial days up there, and they had a platform out in front of the Carnegie Library where they carried on the ceremony. And when the Haskell got sore at Guthrie, but he was governor because he had a running fight with the state capital newspaper up there, the leading newspaper in the state at that time.
At Guthrie.
Frank Greer was editor. tall, gray-haired, bushy-haired man, a very pioneer, a real pioneer. And Haskell got sore in the state capitol, and he made his brag that he got to move the capital to Oklahoma City, and did before they even had time to count the votes. They took the seal down and declared Oklahoma City the state capital. My wife was working in the Secretary of State's office at the time, before I was married. And we heard the rumor that the seal had been transferred down there, and she had a key to the office. We went down on Saturday night to see it, and sure enough, it was gone. Heard after that, she had to live in Oklahoma City. They had the governor's office in the Huckins Hotel, and they had some of the offices out there in the old 4th Street school building on the east side. People of Guthrie built a building up there for the state capitol and tried to hold it, but that later became a part of the Scottish Rite Consistory. They built a wonderful consistory building up there.
That's a beautiful building, and a lot of people think that was the Capitol building.
Yeah, it looks good. It was built in the same order as
What was her name? What was your wife's name?
Her name was Betty Skidmore.
Skidmore.
And she came down from Pond Creek, Oklahoma. She's native of Indiana, but her people were from Kentucky also. And she came down with Mr. Taylor to work in Mr. Taylor's office first. He was the examiner and inspector, I believe was his title, territorial government. And then she got position in the Secretary of State's office, and Bill Cross was secretary.
Is that where you met her? Is that where you met her?
Yes, I met her then in Guthrie. And we were married in December 1910. They had moved the capital down from Guthrie in June 1910. And we had our 50th anniversary 4 years ago.
Where were you married, in Guthrie or here?
Guthrie. My father married us.
Your father?
Christian minister.
Did he have a church there?
No. He came down here on account of his health and having asthma pretty bad, but he found that he still wanted to carry on somewhat, and he got one or two churches close by. He went over to Chandler every other Sunday, I think it was, and one or two towns close by. And then in 1901, I believe it was, they had the drawing of land and the opening up of the Caddo, Comanche, and Kiowa counties. And had a drawing at El Reno. My father went down and filed for a claim and he drew one of the early claims, went down and picked out a farm close to Hobart, Oklahoma. A mile north of Lone Wolf, as it's called now.
Right.
And I guess they all had a little that pioneer spirit, and he loaded up mother and the 3 children. My older brother was working out in Texas Panhandle at that time, and I was working in Mutual Life. He loaded up the 3 children and mother in a covered wagon and drove through Lone Wolf and built a little shanty out there on the prairie. Lived down there 2 years in order to prove up on this farm, which he got title from the government to $1.25 an acre after living on it 2 years. And he realized that the children hadn't had enough chance to schooling yet. My younger brother, Jess, came over to Norman to take a preliminary high school course from the university, preparatory to entering the university at the recommendation of C.C. Roberts, who was a banker down there at Long Island. But my father decided after he proved up on the farm, got title to it, to come back to Guthrie and where the children could go to school. My two younger sisters and younger brother went through high school at Guthrie, finished. Jess went down to the university in 4 years, graduated in law, went out to Montana to practice law for a few years, and I got him back down here in the life insurance business after I got to be manager of Mutual Life after we moved the office down here to Oklahoma City.
When did they move the office here?
That was February 1st, 1915.
And you came down here from Guthrie with the office?
I came down here, and the top floor of the Concord building, which had been occupied by the Chamber of Commerce, was one big room up there, and I stepped off the partitions and all for our office and established the office for Mutual Life. I was cashier. But they put another man in as manager following Judge Lowe's retirement. The fellow they'd promised it to over at Memphis had been disappointed over there when there was a change made. Came over to Muskogee. I went over there and made a contract with him, outlined the district for him and so on, while I was cashier. But they made him manager, and had a pretty black year for not too much to do. I trained the people in the office to do the work of the office, and he didn't allow me to do very much out in the field, and I wrote some business. I always wrote some business. I made about as much when I was cashier at Guthrie writing insurance as I did out of my salary. I considered it a service to humanity to sell insurance and help people to help themselves and provide for the future and so on. And I finally sold my father on the idea of after he'd retired and was going to come up to Guthrie. My older brother's idea was that he'd take his library and a lot of reading. He always liked to read and have a garden and so on. But I didn't think he'd be contented or satisfied with just that, and so I persuaded him to sell insurance. He didn't like it at first. He didn't like people who'd turn their back to him, you know. And see him coming in. And I said, well, Father, they're not running from you. They're running from their own consciences. They're running from something they ought to have. And it's their own conscience that causes them to take that attitude. You've got something to offer them that they really ought to have if you can find some way to present it to them. And well, he finally got along pretty well and wrote a little insurance there up to the last day of his life, and he lived to be 81.
For heaven's sake.
And my mother lived then until 94. Still lives in Guthrie.
She's still living, huh?
No, she's been gone a number of years, but my older sister still lives in the old home place up there at Guthrie.
She does?
By herself. And the younger sister's husband died many years ago and left her with 3 youngsters, lived down at Lawton and was employed out at the Fort Sill in the library, down at the librarian.
How old's your sister, the older sister?
Let's see, she's about 76. I'm 82. And my older brother lives in Roswell, New Mexico, is 84. My younger brother, Jesse T. Owens, who was with me all the time until I was manager of Mutual Life, but lost his wife last year, and his only children he has is his one daughter and her 5 children, and she married a young doctor, and they moved to Hawaii. He's over to Hawaii, and I'll be back next month. I'm rattling on here with a lot of detail you're probably not too much interested in.
It's extremely interesting this way because it comes to you as it hits your mind rather than just setting it down in a more formal type of thing.
I don't know what else you might be interested in knowing. I served the company as state manager for about 30 years and retired. I've been retired now nearly 20 years, about 20 years. They've had 4 managers since I retired, 3 here and one, and opened up an office in Tulsa, which I always recommended. And I still go down there and get my mail occasionally.
Your brother, let's see, was it Jess that went to OU?
Yeah. And we had 3 children. Our son was born in Guthrie, August 1913. He was in the service, was a captain in the field artillery when he was killed in the Philippines in the Second World War. And our 2 daughters, one married a boy who was both daughters married men in the Air Force. One of them came out of the service after spending 18 months in Italy. He came out a major, and the oldest daughter married a boy who spent his time in the service at the Wright Airfield, at Patterson Field in New Jersey, in
Dayton,
Ohio. And was on the West Coast just at the time, was ready to go overseas when the war ended. He came out a lieutenant colonel. They live in New Jersey, and he has an office in New York City. He's president of the Whitco Chemical Company. And the other daughter lives on the West Coast in San Diego, and her husband has 2 children and represents the General Motors Frigidaire district man there in San Diego, Frigidaire. My daughter in New Jersey has 9 children.
9 children.
I have 12 grandchildren. Our son, who was killed in the Philippines, left a son he never got to see, and he's 20 years old now. Goes to school at Stillwater, 3rd year. Lives with us. And, only one of my 12 grandchildren live here. One close to the other. Last year we had the privilege of visiting them both, but it's pretty far to get there very often.
Well, it's real rewarding when they get together, though, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Is there a connection, and I should know, and maybe, if there is a connection between Owen and Owen Field in Norman?
Oh, I think that field was named after Benny Owen. He was a famous coach down there, you know, for many years at Norman. One-armed Benny.
What relation, if any?
No relation that I know of. Owen is a Welsh name. Dr. Duke used to be the mayor of Guthrie, a Tennessean, and Major Owen, he was a brother of Robert L. Owen, a farmer senator from Muskogee. Time of Thomas P. Gore, and Robert L. Owen was the 2 senators from Oklahoma. Robert L. Owen had a brother who was a major, and their mother lived right across the street from us in Guthrie. He'd come up there once in a while, and my father and him get together, and Father had a family tree he kept, he built, and he could tell you the origin of all, some of the limbs that had some members that wasn't too proud of, but Dr. Duke said the name of Owen was the original Welsh name, and that they got to have the family going over to Owenses, and that's where the S got tacked on. But Major Owen and my father, who had an S on his name, found that they had the same origin from Wales through Virginia and Kentucky and on out Missouri and so on.
So way back there probably is, but then way back.
My mother was little Scotch Irish, so I have Scotch Irish and Welsh descent.
That's quite a combination. You got any idea how much insurance you wrote? Have any idea? I know it's an astronomical figure, obviously.
It wouldn't be very big compared to present day figures. The way the insurance business has grown so tremendously fast in the last several years, last few years particularly. Oh, I don't know. We had something like 50-some-odd million in force, I think, in Oklahoma when I retired. Of course, it come and go off the books. People die, move away, lapse, and so on. I don't remember. And our company was a pretty conservative old company. They kind of leaned over backwards to obey the laws and be conservative, especially following the I don't know whether you're old enough to remember the investigation of insurance companies back in New York by Charles Evans Hughes.
I read about it.
And then the enactment of what they call the Armstrong Law in New York, regulating insurance companies. Put in pretty strict rules about limited the amount of insurance they could write, in fact, for a time, and limited the amount of commissions they could pay, and so forth and so on. And it used to be a common practice among insurance companies to make contributions to campaign funds. Well, they stopped all that, Of course, it was wrong for a mutual company and policyholders' money, Democrats and Republicans contributing to some campaign fund on the other side. And they felt there's exercise in good business judgment when they did it, but then they'd be in the penitentiary if they did it today. Well, now there's some other people who need to learn that lesson besides the insurance companies. I got it right now. What do they call it? The combination of churches.
Combination of churches.
Yeah, that. The combination of churches.
Combination of churches.
Yeah, that. Church organizations has representatives of
all faiths.
Yes.
National Council of Christians.
National Council of Church. Now they made contribution last year to Lyndon B. Johnson's campaign. Well, had no business doing such a thing. I don't care what your politics are. That's money that belongs to the people that are on both sides of that question. And they had no business contributing their money to one side of a campaign, a political campaign, and they'd be put in the penitentiary if they was the head of an insurance company and doing it. Well, we learned to do a lot of things, and I don't know. They talk about the moral standards are being low today comparatively, but there's a lot of things nowadays that we look upon as being wrong that used to be not considered wrong to do. A lot of room for improvement yet, but there's so much talk about teenagers that I find that teenagers are pretty decent lot as a rule. I've been a member of the Rotary Club, Oklahoma City, for 40-some years, 44 years. Got 35-year perfect attendance record. That's the reason why I was down there last Tuesday in the storm.
Isn't that wonderful?
And we've got a practice of bringing into our club a representative of each high school in the community as a junior Rotarian, and he sits in the meetings every week for 5 weeks. And he gets inoculated with the spirit of Rotary and the objects of Rotary, and we learn a lot from those kids too.
I'll bet you do.
Every week, one of the boy from some high school stands up there and gives a talk on Americanism. And he makes a better talk than most of the Rotarians kids.
Well, you probably know very well, and an old friend of yours would be Morris Lowenstein.
Oh yes.
Quite a few of those, quite a few of your contemporaries are Rotarians, aren't they?
Oh yeah. Allen Street. His former mayor, his children and our children grew up right next to each other out there on 36th Street. I live right across the street from Judge Vaught. Judge Vaught lived across the street from me because I was there first, but fact of the matter is, we built one of the first houses built out there in old Putnam Heights when we came down here from Guthrie. We lived in the old Putnam house out there in the prairie wheat field, practically.
On
Wheat
36th Street?
Well, the Putnam home was around on the corner from 36th on McKinley Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
3 doors from 36th Street. They owned a house there on the corner with the Hopper home, the old Hopper home. Eddie Miller had it for a while, and now I don't know who bought it now, lives in it. But
Is Putnam home still there?
yeah, it's been improved. You wouldn't recognize today. It's been modernized and took the old red barn away from there that we used to have.
Yeah.
But while we was living there, we built right around the corner there on 36th Street in 1917.
Mm-hmm.
And Allen Street was next door neighbor, and there was a vacant lot between us. Later, Tom Lowry, Dr. Tom Lowry and his family lived there. And Everett Hill lived in that Miller home on the corner, old Hopper home. At the time, he was president of the Rotary International.
Mm-hmm.
And Allen and Everett are both well known, active in the organization. And Allen was a national secretary or treasurer one time at Rotary International, and Everett got to be president of Rotary International and traveled all over the world making talks to the clubs while he lived in our neighbor. And they had lots of visitors come from here and there that they entertained for dinner. We was invited over there to these dinners pretty every time some noted militarian come to town, from Sheffield, England, from Switzerland, from North Carolina, wherever it was. Presidents of Rotary and Allen Street didn't used to play golf. He'd say, "Guy, we should take Gene Newsom out and show him how to play golf and help entertain him when he come to town." And he used to make fun of anybody who played golf, follow a little ball around. But he later took it up himself. He plays more cards, I guess, than he does golf, but not either one now. He's not in too good a health. I guess he and Irma are out in Arizona right now. On the month of February, they spent out there for the last several years.
I talked to him a few weeks ago.
These boys come in there as junior Rotarians, serve 5 weeks, and they go out of there, and you'd be surprised at the kind of program they'd put on.
Mm-hmm.
And the ideas that they have, and the way of being able to express their ideas, stand up there and talk like an old timer on their feet. And then when they every time they have a stock show out here, we have a prominent Rotarian out there that brings these boys and girls in from the stock show. The Future Farmers of America and what they call the other organization is similar.
4-H club.
4-H club, boys and girls. And to hear those boys and girls get up there and make a talk and show the ideals that they have and the aspirations they have, it revives your faith in this younger generation.
They have a lot to offer, haven't they?
Yes, I think you do. You hear too much about some of the escapades of some of the few that create the headlines in the papers about West and that. And nowadays, when anything happens today, it's known all over tomorrow. Days of communication, television, radio, newspapers, and so forth. We read of all the crimes that take place the world over, what's happening in Vietnam and so forth.
Well, your neighbor, Allen Street, he was quite a mayor, wasn't he?
I think he made one of the best mayors I've had since I've been here. His father was mayor way back in early days. And his father, I guess, well, he left Allen pretty well fixed. He has some holdings down there on Main Street that bring him in independent income. And make a difference. His business is a good paying business. That Street and Draper used to be called. And his son Gordon is in there. There is a situation that happened during the World War that shows you the uncertainty of life, and you never can tell what the future is going to hold. We've each had sons in the service, but our son was killed in the Philippines, the only boy we had. Gordon was in the Navy, and he was over there in the same area in the South Pacific, and he sprained his back and was getting into one of those boats one day in the rough sea. Had to have a cast for a long time, but he came home. But Bob Allen, the older boy, who wasn't in the service, was electrocuted in his own home, in the basement of his own home, one quiet Sunday afternoon. You know, had water ran into the basement over there in Crown Heights, one of those low places. And he went down in the basement, I guess, in that water contact by a wire, electrocuted in his own home. The other boy, off over there in such a dangerous place as the Navy during the World War, came home, and he's down there running the business now.
Yeah. Strange.
Isn't it?
Well, a lot happened during Street's administration.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things happened during Street's administration, or two administrations.
Well, I was on the Fish and Game Commission for the city out here for about 15 years. Judge Hefner put me on there. First, I didn't like it. Get down there and we'd talk things over and make some recommendations, and the city council didn't pay attention to it. And finally I had to find out you got to be a little thin, tough-skinned if you're going to get along with people in politics, and the ceased to let it bother me anymore. But Allen come along, was elected mayor, and he says, "Well, Guy, you're stuck for 4 more years." And well, it proved to be 8 more years he was mayor. And for 15 years I was on that commission. And finally they had this new crowd come on, and I didn't know any of them. Didn't know the mayor, didn't know the members of the council. And there got to be considerable complaints about the way we was treated on the part of the members of the committee. And the rangers come in from the lakes out there. We tried to make rules to regulate, try to please everybody. You can't do it, but a lot of people forget that those lakes are built for the water supply for a city of 300 and some odd thousand people instead of a playground, and some of the younger generation used to cuss us out because we would let them go out there and go skiing and swimming and so on. Well, the Board of Health backed us up on that, but anyway, they'd go around out there on Saturday night or something like that time when the weather was right, and find people out there doing things they shouldn't, and find some colored fellow or somebody else was stealing things out of people's cars and stealing motors and doing one thing and another.
Yeah.
They'd make the arrest, bring him in. The city judge would come down there on Monday morning, and I mean, always short of rangers, didn't have enough help out there to do the job like it ought to be done. And they'd have to sit around there with the fellow they brought in there and stand trial for some charge until they get through with all the drunks and the prostitutes and cool their heels and waste their time. And then when they come up before the judge say, "Well, case dismissed, pay not much attention to." And we get kind of tired of that. And Slim Dolligan was chairman the last time. The old man died, the original chairman. Smoky Woods, she called him. Sam Woods. Dolligan was chairman of the committee, and they had one of those meetings down there one day, and I said, "Well, I'm going to resign from down here and let them put somebody on this committee that they've got some confidence in, that to get something done. What's the use of wasting their time coming down here and trying to regulate or help the city and don't get anything for it, except cussing." And So I turned in my resignation. His proposal was to give a fish fry and invite the city council, the mayor, and the judge out there and tell them about what's going on and create a picture for them. And if they're going to have a committee, they ought to pay some attention to them. So, well, I will put up my $10 to help put on the feed, but after that, I'm through. I'm not going to waste my time coming down here and just be kicked around like that. So I resigned. But I was on there 15 years, during the 8 years that Allen was mayor, and I always thought he made a good mayor, and he had a reputation to make it a good mayor. A lot of people, most people liked his administration.
Well, there were a lot of accomplishments during his 2 terms.
Well, he'd had quite a little experience. He served several terms in the legislature, before. And he'd always been more or less civic-minded, and his father was civic-minded. Allen can tell you about early days in Oklahoma.
I had a nice conversation with him a few weeks ago.
Did you?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what I've been telling you, any value to anybody, but...
Did you get into anything else politically, or
No,
in the city?
No, I never held a political job in my life. I've been on the board of various organizations in Oklahoma City, like the YMCA and the Oklahoma Club. I was a charter member of the Oklahoma Club that built that building down there in the Anna province. And the Rotary Club and the Oklahoma City Golf and Country Club. I was a member of the Country Club, and we used to be out here at Crown Heights, and Doc Nichols built that Nichols Hills out there. You'll hear of very few fellows that make a hole-in-one playing golf. I see on television here some fellow announced that somebody else made a hole-in-one. And you find very few professionals that have made a hole-in-one.
Right.
But I made 2.
You did?
I made a hole-in-one on the second hole over the old club, and then 10 years later out at the other club on hole number 5, I made a hole, I believe it was 5 or 6, 5 I think. Made a hole-in-one, and there were 3 of us at the same foursome after 10 years.
Isn't that something?
Judge Robert R. Bell and A.J. McMahon used to be a bond broker here. Neither one of them, all of my old golf pals are gone. And the fact of the matter is, I don't have an enemy on earth. I've outlived all of them, and I have very few friends left. It seems like about all I've done in recent years is 10 funerals. Thinking this morning about 2 that went away passed last week out of our Rotary Club. Joe Hamilton and Bert Bissell.
Yeah. Well, this city has certainly turned into an insurance capital, hasn't it?
Yes, it's sprung up. It looks like they've got a lot of new companies at high promotion. I don't know how they're going to get along. I used to think about when the Mid-Continent built it down there many years ago. They was criticized for putting all their assets in the building, but I guess they built a fair life insurance company, and Joe Morris built the Oklahoma Life. Them Biggers built an outfit that he used to give us a lot of trouble. And for around a campaign slogan about keeping your money at home, and then after he built a company up and made his wad out of it, he sold out to Texas, a company down Texas.
No, Mutual's still going strong.
Oh yeah, Mutual going. They lean over backwards trying to obey the laws, and they do things now. They're taking on things that they didn't do while I was manager. They're just branching out in fields of hospitalization and group insurance, and a lot of up-to-date things they didn't have, and didn't have pension plans and so on for their agents. And a lot of these companies now use the experience. That's one thing I never could understand, why these little companies that start up as stock companies, and there's always started with the idea of making money out of stock, selling stock. But the mutual life of New York was organized on the basis of a bunch of men of the same kind of a mind that get together for the mutual benefit to create a mutual organization to take care of each other as face the future without the idea of making money for themselves as a branch of service, as a service organization. More than a business institution is more considered a service organization. And that was the way of the mutual, and that was the way of the New York life. But in the big stock companies, there's only a few of them that really succeeded in being big companies as stock companies. That's the Aetna and the Travelers. The other, the Exeter started out as a stock company. And so did the Metropolitan. So did the Prudential. But when they got up to the point where the obligation was greater to the policyholders than it was to the stockholders, they mutualized, bought off their stockholders, and went on a mutual participating life insurance basis. And the ideal of service has been the ideal that I've always had of the life insurance business. And when I see these fellows that spring up with the new companies here and build a big tower, I just wonder whether they're going to make it good or whether they're not going to make it good. They used to, especially for I told you about the Armstrong law in New York, and following that investigation back there and clearing up of some of the evils of the business, the state of Texas passed what they call the Robertson Law, compulsory investment law. The idea was to cause outside companies, or foreign companies they call them, to invest 75% of their legal reserves in Texas securities in order to do business in the state. That was a requirement that they didn't require of their home companies in order to develop home institutions. And they made big claims about the result of that law, that what accomplished the state of Texas. Well, they did build some pretty good companies down there, but they did some other places too. Texas is a big state, 5 times as big as Oklahoma. Naturally, it would have more organizations in a state that big than it would in the state of Oklahoma. And I've seen so many of these stock companies that organized for the purpose of making money and selling the stock that go out of business, come and go, and consolidate. Now the old International of St. Louis was a regular dumping ground of broken down companies. Eventually went out of business itself. Or else they sold out to somebody else. The Missouri State Life took over some, they called it General American now. But I just wonder about how many of these companies are going to really succeed, and whether a man would depend on them for his future family's security and life insurance is safe and to depend on it or not. They're not organized on that sort of a basis. Of course, that comes from a way of thinking, being competitors.
Right.
But they may turn out to be all right. Now, they built that big tower out there, Founders Life Insurance Company.
Yes.
Founders Building, Founders Cafe. They get Bob Smith out there on the Annie Maud's cafeteria up there on the top of that building. I met a young doctor down there at the Rotary the other day. I asked him what his classification was. He says pediatrics. I said, where's the office? He says, at the Tower Building. I said, well, how are they doing out there? How are they filling that building up? Been a Tennessee. He didn't know.
Oh, I imagine gradually they'll get it filled up.
Well, it's certainly a prominent thing in the eyes of a lot of people. They're really getting the publicity.
Yes, that's true.
A lot of people pay a lot in the way of advertising for what they're getting. But if they get all their assets tied up in the building, I don't know if they'd ever have a panic thing happened like during the First World War when they had the flu epidemic, something like it happened to take a large number of lives out of one community. The life insurance business is founded on the wide distribution of risk and the wide distribution of investment to make it safe. That is, of course, it depends on good management.
Right.
I heard of David Franklin Houston used to be Secretary of the United States, Treasurer of the United States. And he's the man that appointed all these county agents, agricultural. And nobody asked him one day about the difference between between the stock companies and between a bond and a stock. Well, he says bonds are presumably a sounder investment, but they're each dependent upon good management. The well-managed stock companies are better than the poor-managed bond company that puts out bonds.
It gets back to the individual, doesn't it?
That's right.
And the individual thinking.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of, not necessarily, they're not insurance companies, but there have been a lot in the stock business now, mutual funds.
Yeah, that's based on the same idea of the life insurance company's distribution of investments.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they've proven to be a pretty good source outlet for capital investments of a lot of people. But I never have looked into it too much. It's been since my time mostly. But I had one experience following the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And I told you about A.J. McMahon, one of the men I played golf with. High-minded, upright Christian gentleman, an elder in my church. He sold bonds. Well, he got onto the fact one day that, of course, of a game of golf, that I was about to mature a block of building and loan stock. I had 5 of them going at one time. I went around from office to office and contributed $25 a month to 5 of them till I matured them. 20 years. Well, this block of stock at $5,000 is about to mature, and at that time, following the First World War, the Federal Reserve Bank had the government had authorized the organization of what they call mutual investment trusts. And I forget the name of this first one that McMahon was. He got interested in on the idea. They had the same idea of a wide distribution of investments that life insurance companies had. And they were restricted from investing more than 15% in any one country. But the idea was to rebuild the world financial structure like it is now. We're making big contributions to help bolster up the whole world. And well, it sounded like a good thing to me, and a sound investment, and paid, I think, 5% is supposed to be. So I planked down $5,000 in this mutual investment trust just through McMahon, my friend.
Mm-hmm.
He put in $10,000 of his own daughter's money into it. Charlie Dunning and Dunning Construction Company put up 5, and some more of my friends. Well, that thing went along until finally I sold what little it was left I had left in the thing for $250.
200. That's quite a loss.
That was quite a loss. My investments had a reflection on my judgment. I used to have some bank stock, First National Bank, and I didn't buy any stock for a long time because we used insurance business to sell insurance to citizens, businessmen of the community, and we made it a practice not to be too much tied up with any one institution. We had insurance on the president of every bank in town.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an approached a time or two about buying some stock, but I had refrained from doing it on that account until Charlie Gunter, who used to be the old Security National,
Mm-hmm.
they moved and I organized the Liberty National. And Ned Holman was president in there, and Ned Holman was a friend of mine that I knew in Guthrie. And by the way, Fred Holman died yesterday. That's president of the First National up there in Santa Fe. Charlie Gunter, president of the Liberty National, and John Teeter, who was with Hugh Johnson in the First National, came over here from Bristol. I knew that family before they married. Elmo Dysart, sister, Minnie Dysart is Mrs. Teeter, widow now. And those fellows got me in the corner there when after they all come together and organized the First National, which is made up of the First National, American National, and the Liberty and the Security National.
Right.
Then they sold me some stock, and it turned out pretty. Sounded like it turned out pretty good. It paid me 8% on time. Then along come the Depression. I had two daughters away in school at the time of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
I had to have some money, so that's what was coming in on it. And I sold the bank stock when it was the lowest, and I bought it at the highest. If I'd have held on to it today, it'd have been really worth something. But that's been my experience as an investor.
You stuck with the life insurance, huh?
Yeah, I was approached 2 times to try to get me into some of these new organizations. I remember when I organized the old Oklahoma Life, they offered me the job of secretary of the company. Well, before I was made manager, I was cashier. And I was at Guthrie with Judge Lowe. And Ed Holman's name I mentioned just now, the First National Bank up there. I was with Judge Lowe and going through his experience of poor health, and looked like there's going to be a change in the organization there soon. And I went back east to the National Underwriters Convention, Atlantic City. Rode on a train with a man from St. Louis, was with the Germania Life, which is later called the Guardian Life, and somebody else. Got up there and we roomed together in the same room. And I met their home office head of the department. It had to do with the production of business, appointment of agents and so on.